is Jenna, and today I am going to be filming a movie review of Solo, a Star Wars story. This movie is highly controversial in whether or not it actually should have been made. I know a lot of die-hard Star Wars fans are adamant that it shouldn't because Han Solo can only be played by Harrison Ford, and I know a lot of other people who aren't as invested in the Star Wars universe actually really enjoyed the movie. I have loved the Star Wars films since I was a very small child, and I was hesitant towards the movie, but ultimately I ended up really enjoying it, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. So before I get started on the review, this is going to be spoiler free, so if you haven't yet seen the movie, you can watch this video in its entirety without fear of being spoiled. So basically, the Solo story was an origin story of Han Solo, so it showed us how he became the man that we met in the cantina in Star Wars A New Hope. And that was something that has always really interested me, because when you meet him, he's so surly and he doesn't really want to do anything. He's only interested in the money, and as you kind of meet him throughout the rest of the trilogy, he sort of changes his personality. He becomes more of a hero, that sort of thing. And I was really curious to see how that all came about, how his personality all happened. So the storyline for this movie is, it's basically a heist film, which I love. They are doing the Kessel Run, which is something that we heard a lot about in the original trilogy. We heard a lot about Han. He would be bragging that he did the Kessel Run in a certain amount of parsecs, and we finally got to see that in this movie. So that's what this movie was based around. It was based around this heist. And I really enjoyed that, and we got to see a lot of points in the timeline that we had heard of, stuff like winning the Millennium Falcon off of Lando, meeting Chewbacca, that sort of thing. We got to meet a lot of these different points, and we got to see them happen on screen. So the storyline, I thought, was really well done, and I thought that it definitely ticked those boxes, which in some aspects, I know people are happy that they finally have an answer to how Chewie and Han met, how Lando and Han met, that sort of thing. But I know other people are really upset by it. They really wanted to have what was in their imagination kind of take over. So that is obviously something that is potentially can happen when you do a movie like this. You can take away people's imagination and they can sometimes get mad. So the storyline for this film was really quite a simple one, and it was one that it felt familiar because it was events that we had already heard about. So it felt like a familiar story. So when it comes to the characters of this film, obviously we have a bunch of characters that we already know, like Han, Chewie and Lando, except they are obviously played by younger actors. And we also had a bunch of new characters like Qi'ra and Han's mentor and a bunch of others. So when it comes to the characters that we already knew, Han especially, I think that Alden, cannot say his last name for the life of me, but I think he did a really good job as Han Solo. There were moments, especially when he was interacting with other members of the cast, I thought he was really genuine in his performance. I think that he really pulled off the scoundrel kind of playboy attitude that Han Solo has in the original trilogy, and I think he was just this giant goofball, and I loved him and I loved his performance. Lando was hands down the best part of the film. Donald Glover nailed Lando Calrissian to a T. He was actually fantastic, and I loved Chewbacca as well, and I really loved getting to see the early interactions between these characters because it just filled in a lot of gaps, and it helped us to really understand who these characters were and their relationships to each other before we meet them in New Hope, Empire, etc. Because I think meeting them the way that we did in those movies, it was kind of hard to really back their relationship and back their friendships because we had nothing to go on, and now we have this really solid foundation of this is why they are such good friends and this is what happened, and I love that. I love that we've gotten to see that and that we get these really concrete ideas of who they are and why they are the way they are. So we had a bunch of new characters, like I said. So we had Qi'ra, who was Han's love interest before obviously he met the love of his life, Leia. I have to say, while I did enjoy Qi'ra, I did think she was a nice character, very well rounded. I really couldn't believe the romance between Qi'ra and Han, and I think that's because of the whole Leia situation. So I know that Leia is much further down the track, and I probably should have been okay with Kira's relationship with Han. I just wasn't. Every time they were like kissing or something, I was like, get your mitts off him, he's Leia's. So that definitely was a struggle for me. I'm not really surprised that they included a love story in this film because that's kind of part of who Han's character is, but it just, it was just really hard to believe and to take seriously, and it didn't take anything away from the movie, but it kind of didn't add anything in either. So that was kind of tricky. We also had another new character in the form of Beckett. Beckett was Han's mentor throughout this film, and Beckett was just a fun kind of character. Some of his character motivations were really flawed, but you could also see from Beckett, you could see that Han learned a lot of stuff from him that he takes with him into the original trilogy. It's stuff that wasn't said directly out loud, but for those of us who have seen the original trilogy, we can see definitely that there were moments where Beckett has influenced Han and the way that he acts, and I think that was really, really clever and really well done, so I absolutely loved that. The villain for this film, Dryden Voss, he was so charismatic. I loved him to pieces. Like, I really did. It was one of these really fun villains who was really charismatic, so you kind of hated him, but you kind of didn't because he was so polite about it. And the coolest thing about this film was that it really focused on the dark underworld of Star Wars. So obviously in Star Wars, especially in the original trilogy, we've got the Empire who are, you know, destroying and conquering and all of that. Prequel trilogy, we have the Sith and all of that going on. But in this film, we dive into kind of the criminal underworld of Star Wars. And we got to see a little bit of that in the original trilogy with Jabba the Hutt and knowing that Han was a smuggler with all the bounty hunters, that kind of thing. But this film really introduced it to us properly, and we really got to dive into it. And that was something that I really loved. I loved seeing this criminal underworld of Star Wars where every single character was really morally grey. You didn't really know who was a good guy, who was a bad guy, and that was something just really refreshing and made the film feel more like a heist film than a traditional Star Wars film, because that's what Rogue One did so well. It felt way more like a war film than a traditional Star Wars movie, and I think that that really works in its favour. So having the Han Solo movie feel a lot more like a heist film definitely worked in its favour to make it a better film. So overall, like I said, I did give this film a 4 out of 5 stars because I really did thoroughly enjoy the movie. I think it was done really well. I think all of the cast did an incredible job at bringing these characters to life, especially the cast who were playing characters that we already knew and loved. That can't have been an easy job to try and fill those shoes, and I think that they did it really, really well. The only thing I would have to say about this movie, and the reason it didn't get 5 stars from me, while it was really, really enjoyable to watch, the movie really wasn't necessary. I loved seeing how everything came together. I loved seeing how Han and Chewie met, how Han won the Millennium Falcon off of Lando. I loved seeing all of that, but it really wasn't a necessary film to make, and I think they could have concentrated their Star Wars stories on something else, something different, a character we didn't know quite as well. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comment section below if you have seen Solo, A Star Wars Story, and what you thought of it. I would absolutely love to know. If you like this video, be sure to give it a huge thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a thing. Stay random. Bye.